Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've always been a meat lover. Growing up, my mom would cook up juicy burgers, savory steaks, and fall off the bone ribs that had me licking my fingers. As an adult, grilling up meat on the weekends became my favorite pastime. The sizzling sound of patties on the grill and the mouth-watering smell of barbecue sauce reliably put a smile on my face. So when my wife and I moved into our new home last year, I was eager to fire up the grill and get cooking. That first weekend, I invited our new neighbors over for a little barbecue to break the ice. Everyone seemed friendly enough, except for one woman, Karen. She took one look at the grilled chicken I was serving and turned up her nose. How can you eat those poor animals?" she exclaimed. I politely explained that I enjoyed meat and offered her a veggie burger instead. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "You'll regret polluting your body with flesh one day," she said. With that, she stormed off, leaving me scratching my head. A confrontational vegan neighbor was new territory for me. But I figured as long as I respected her dietary choices, she could respect mine, and we'd get along fine. Oh, how wrong I was. The very next weekend, I was back at the grill flipping juicy steaks and chicken wings. The aroma of barbecue filled the air. Suddenly, I heard the gate to my backyard fly open. Karen came marching up to me, waving her phone in hand. "I'm calling the police," she announced. "You're breaking the law by grilling dead animals back here." I stood there stunned, spatula in hand, as she proceeded to call cop. Sure enough, a few minutes later, a squad car pulled up. The officer stepped out looking puzzled. "Ma'am, you reported an illegal barbecue?" he asked hesitantly. Karen pointed a damning finger my way. "Officer, this man is openly cooking poor, defenseless animals in his backyard. The smell is appalling. I demand you make him cease this instant." The officer scratched his head and looked at me grilling steaks. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but cooking meat on a grill in his own yard is perfectly legal," he said. Karen's shrill voice rose in pitch. "That can't be! Meat is murder! He's destroying the planet!" she shrieked. The officer held up a hand calmly. "Ma'am, people are allowed to eat whatever diet they choose. I suggest you return to your own home and let this man grill in peace." Karen looked ready to explode. Her face turned an angry shade of red. For a minute it seemed she might stomp her foot in protest, but she composed herself and turned on her heel, marching back out the gate. I thanked the officer as he left. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen wasn't done with her crusade. The following Saturday evening, my wife and I had friends over for a barbecue party. Picture this idyllic scene. Fairy lights strung over the patio, music playing on the speakers, and freshly grilled burgers being passed around. Laughter and happy chatter filled the summer air. Suddenly, we heard a commotion at the gate. Karen burst in, waving a poster board scrawled with slogans like, "Meat is murder." In her other hand, a can of fake blood, which she proceeded to splash dramatically over the grill. "Stop this madness!" she demanded. "I won't let you celebrate your bloodthirsty ways in my presence." My wife hurried to call cop while I attempted to reason with Karen, but there was no talking sense into her. She began dumping our veggie burgers onto the ground, screaming about contamination. That's when the police arrived. 2 officers had to drag Karen away as she kicked and flailed her arms. They stuck her in the back of the squad car while taking statements from me and our shocked guests. We showed them footage from our security camera documenting the bizarre incident. Karen was arrested for disorderly conduct and destruction of property. In the following weeks, Karen was fined for the damages and sentenced to anger management classes. My wife and I were granted a restraining order to keep her off our property. I almost felt bad for how her extremism had ruined things, but I decided not to waste any pity on someone so committed to making others miserable. The neighborhood has been blissfully peaceful with Karen out of the picture. I can finally grill in my backyard without fear of retribution. And call me petty, but I may have started a new tradition of hosting an annual steak cook-off party. Sizzling meat and laughing friends fill my yard once again. Karen's provocations only reinforced my commitment to enjoying life on my terms. She did manage to convert me in one small way, though. I now keep a can of bear spray on hand anytime I'm grilling, just in case any other crazy neighbors get similar ideas. The next one is a pro-revenge story. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and at all levels. For someone to move here for work, They have to be sponsored by a company or the individual employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I received a call telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure, essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them while they were engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of, I should say, had his private parts exposed. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare some sense back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense, or else, essentially a slap on the wrist, and everyone got to go home. But it doesn't end there. That night, something clicked in my brain, and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day, thinking maybe they had called the police on them immediately for some reason, or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police had never been to that restaurant before, and when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sitting, and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was, who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to talk to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer, "You know you did something stupid" chat and reassured her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation, she said it had to be Sammy, who was one of our drivers. "Why do you think it was Sammy?" I asked. "He's the one who dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and called the police on us," she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true. That was literally his job, and her only free mode of transport. "Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything?" I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely angered me was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once, and she fought him off, and that he hadn't tried or even said anything since other than being very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, "Why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away?" She said she had dealt with it her way and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now, clearly I was about to fire Sammy, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to assault a person basically and not get in trouble for it, not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sammy. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, "Obviously, you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend?" He stepped in it right away. "Heard about it?" came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sammy. "I called it in." And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sammy, every now and then, he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older man like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, "And why call the police?" He came back with, "After I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I called the police because I know him. And he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man." I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager, or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly? I asked. Silence. Head down, counting his shoes. Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you. He had the audacity to mumble, I only tried once, sir. I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from when we hired him. It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. Hello, Mrs. Sammy. I'm your husband's employer. Well, his former employer anyway. Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XX. He will be arriving at XEX time. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to assault a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry, I said and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. The next one is a petty revenge story. My girlfriend loves to bake. She's not the best out there, but her treats are always tasty and made with love. Every Halloween, she goes all out baking spooky-themed goodies for all the kids and parents in my neighborhood. Last year, we had a new neighbor move in a few months before, and I guess they'd been told about my girlfriend's baking. The new mom came round and asked to speak with my girlfriend. My girlfriend was there at the time, so they chatted for a while, and my girlfriend filled me in afterward. This new mom, obsessed with her kids' diet, wanted them on a low-sugar, low-carb, and flavorless regime. She even asked my girlfriend to replace sugar with Manuka honey and sneak some veggies into the treats. And guess what? She refused to cover the extra cost because, in her mind, only her kids were special enough to deserve such treatment. It was bat crap crazy. I would have just told her to jog on, but not my girlfriend. Halloween arrived, and my girlfriend was in full baking mode, playing the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack in the background and baking up a storm. She crafted cookies shaped like witches' fingers and pumpkins, taking extra care to make them as sugary and flavorful as possible. As the neighborhood kids started trick-or-treating, my girlfriend was her usual delightful self, showering compliments on costumes, acting scared of the scary ones, and handing out her sugary treats with glee. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for, the arrival of the new neighbors. With their mom in tow, my girlfriend handed the kids a little bag of chopped carrots. But here's the kicker. Inside those bags were notes that read something like, "These should match all of your dietary requests. Mom's name. Hope they like them. In case anything changes, there are extra cookies filled with sugar and E-numbers. I'll be happy to share." About 15 minutes later, the kids returned with their dad. I didn't go to the door. Trick-or-treaters are strictly my girlfriend's domain, so I'm not sure exactly what was said. I do know that my girlfriend and the dad shared a good long laugh, and both kids, as well as the dad, left with a handful of those sugary, flavorful cookies. I guess pettiness is a dish best served with cookies. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 20 years ago, I worked in a call center at a budding payment processing company. The main performance metric was the time service factor, TSF, which required answering 80% of calls within 20 seconds. Due to a constant queue of calls, achieving this goal was impossible. Customers were unhappy and management was unhappy. The stage was set. Enter tech support. I was hired fresh out of high school to be the call center's sole tech support and handle customer-facing application migrations. In retrospect, they basically brought me on as a project manager and systems consultant, but I didn't know any better. Unfortunately, our telephony system did not direct callers based on specialization/skill sets, so when customers called in specifically for tech support, there was a 1 in 15 chance of getting the lone tech support agent. Instead of investing in more tech support staff and overhauling the phone VRU menu, management decided the best system was to have representatives physically line up at my desk. It was frustrating and extremely overwhelming to balance my migration projects and the queue of callers that were waiting for me. So I adapted by remaining in not ready as much as possible. Not ready means your line will only ring for direct calls, but only my team had my direct line. Things were going smoother in terms of handling tech calls. People were lining up less, but management was not happy that the TSF goal was not being met. Then one day, my lead pulled me aside and confronted me with my telephony stats. My not ready times were 10x everyone else's, to which I reminded them that I'm the only technician, and if 14 other people were lined up at my cubicle, then they were clogging the lines with people on hold waiting for me. Management did not care. I had a special skill, but I was not special enough to be exempt from the metric. No more not ready. Cue malicious compliance. I pretended my not ready button no longer existed and went about being a rank and file call center rep. The moment I was done with one call, I had to pick up the next. This meant during migration waves and outages, there were moments where my entire team was lined up at my desk waiting to transfer their callers to me. After about 10-15 minutes of just seething by my cubicle's window, some began to confront me. I explained that I was forbidden from using "not ready" to keep my line open. The call queue would have to die down completely until my line was open to accept a transfer call. You could cut the tension with a knife. TSF continued to tank, then call abandon rates skyrocketed, customers were unhappy, and management was unhappy. So did management do the obvious thing and hire more technicians? Right? Nope. First, the new protocol was to post a sticky note with the customer's callback number and ticket hash on my desk. Tell the customer to expect my callback, hang up, then take the next call. From then on, I was expressly only allowed to conduct the callbacks when there were fewer than 10 callers on hold. Second, they took 2 of the regular call center employees and sat them with me to job shadow. Third, they tasked my lead with standing over my shoulder to observe my daily activities. What I showed the team lead was that for every 3 tickets I closed out, 10 more callback tickets would roll in. What he actually ended up doing was reprimanding me for having a high RONA, rollover not answered, count because I'd let some calls roll over if they snuck in while I was doing morning callbacks. Abject dismay. The nightmare finally ended with the mortgage crisis. Management's brilliant business acumen had led the company to insolvency. I jumped ship to complete my college education, then the company shut down about a year later. The next one is an entitled People Story. For reference, I have worked in the same daycare for about 9 months. I was a regular teacher for the first 6 months, transitioning into office work for a couple of months, and I've been almost fully in my office role for about a month. So I had first-hand experience and frustration with this coworker. I'm 20, Carol is in her 60s, Rachel is 19, Kimmy is 30, Ann is 45, and Ben is 50. So basically we got these magnetiles, which are colorful, connectable, and easily buildable magnetic pieces that are good for kids to build with easily, and are easy to put up, so they're good for kids in a class. Carol, a coworker who has young 3-year-olds and also acts entitled because she's old, and has previous daycare experience, has been hoarding the bag of them in her classroom so that only her class can play with them because they're good for keeping kids distracted. So Kimmy, the lead teacher, took them from Carol's room, put them in the art supply closet, and told everyone that they need to stay in there so that everyone has access to them and can have the opportunity to let their class use them. Now, Carol has a history of taking community toys and toys from other classes and hoarding them in her room so that her class can be the calmest and the best, because she knows kids like the toys she hoards. Carol used to take Rachel's Hot Wheels that Rachel bought from Rachel's classroom and keep them in her own room so her kids could play with them, until Rachel started putting her initials on the cars so there would be no mistaking her cars for community cars. We also had some drawing boards for kids. Each class got 5, since most classes have 5. 10 kids, and we only had enough for each teacher to get 5. Carol had 5, I had 5 in my room, Rachel got 5, etc. So I had my 10 kids take turns alternating who got to use the boards, like you're meant to do, as did everyone else. One day I noticed that my 5 boards were missing from my room, but I assumed they got moved to a bigger kid class, since I had 2 3-year-olds and they might not be used as effectively. What actually happened, and that I correctly guessed, was that Carol took it upon herself to take my boards from my room, so that all 10 of her kids could have one, because they just love playing with them so much, and that way everyone can have one at the same time. And after I took them back and mentioned it to her and she brushed it off, she took them again and then I never saw them again. So anyways, after Kimmy said that all teachers should have the opportunity to use the tiles, Carol took it upon herself to claim the tiles for the whole day for her own kids, again. And since she's a 6 a.m. opener, she had the chance to get them and put them in her room before any other teachers got to work. And so she did. And it got caught by Kimmy and Ann, the food cleaning organization person, when Carol was outside, who walked by her class and noticed that the tiles were in there again. Kimmy was going to leave them in there and see if Carol put them back after she used them, but Anne said absolutely not, and took them and put them on the top shelf in the art closet. Then Kimmy told Ben, our director, about it, who then said to put them on his desk, and if she wanted them, she had to talk to him. And then he told me to put them back in the office with me. So it was the same concept, but she had to ask us for them instead of taking them. And wouldn't you guess? A little while later, the kids came inside. I was working in the office, and Carol asks over the radio for Kimmy to come back into her room, and Kimmy asks over the radio what she needs. Carol says, "I had the magnetiles in my room for my class to use today, and now they're gone. Do you know where they went to?" And I just start cracking up back there because we all knew she'd go looking for them again. And Kimmy came back into the office, and I handed them to her while I was cracking up. Moral of the story, Carol's an entitled old lady, and we're getting sick of it. The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened in the mid-90s, but I just saw a TikTok about asking the new mom if it's okay to hold the new baby, and it reminded me of this. I was 10 days past my due date with our first baby when my water finally broke. We went to the hospital, and 24 hours later, I was still nowhere ready to deliver. My OB talked to us about a C-section, and we agreed. It was around 10 p.m. and not an emergency, so my husband called his parents and my mom, and they came to the hospital. A couple of hours later, and we have a beautiful, healthy baby girl. What they don't tell you about the C-section is that it takes no time to get the baby out and forever to sew you back up. I was shown my baby. My arms were laid out with IVs and such. There was no way for me to hold her. Then she was taken to the nursery, and my husband went with her. What felt like hours, but was probably more like 40 minutes, I was taken to the recovery room. My husband is there holding the baby with his parents and my mom. He brings her to me, and I hold her, and it's perfect. I ask my mom if she would like to hold her first grandchild, and she says laughingly, "Oh, I already did." I was still so tired and dopey, it didn't really register. If this had been the end of it, it would probably be a non-issue. I blame the nurse who offered my new baby to my mom, but for the rest of her life, she passed away 2 years ago, she'd bring it up all the time. She would continually refer to our daughter as her girl, even when she was an adult living on her own. When I would remind her that she was, in fact, my daughter, but she was indeed her own person, she would always say, "Nope, she's mine, I held her first." It has always made me crazy that she not only held her first, but constantly rubbed it in my face. When we had our second and third C-sections for all three, I made sure to tell the nurses. They were appalled and assured me that wouldn't happen. My husband and I were alone in recovery, just us and the new baby, for those births. My mom was pissy about it each time, and then would remind me that she held my oldest before I did. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.